The Visitors. A strange sound in the darkness can be more frightening than anything standing in front of you. That's exactly what science gets right for much of its running time. The movie follows Graham Hess, a former priest living on an isolated farm with his 2 children, Morgan and Bo, and his mother Meryl. When enormous crop circles appear in their fields, the family has no idea who or what could have made them. The film takes its time revealing what's happening. A lot of time. Something moves through the corn at night. Dogs suddenly become agitated. Strange noises come from outside the house. At one point, Graham catches a glimpse of something moving between the stalks, but the camera never gives us enough to understand what we're seeing. Even when the family watches footage of one of the creatures, the shot is brief and unclear, giving us little more than a silhouette and a glimpse of its body. Then the movie finally gives us a proper look. The creatures are tall, thin, and humanoid, and after more than an hour of uncertainty, the design feels surprisingly ordinary. The thing lurking in the corn was far more frightening when we could barely see it. The Creeper. A good horror movie can make you spend half its runtime wondering what kind of monster you're dealing with. Jeepers Creepers does exactly that at first. The first half keeps the threat frustratingly unclear. The creeper is mostly seen from a distance, often looking like an ordinary person. The movie uses empty farmland, isolated buildings, and long stretches of road to make the danger feel disturbingly plausible. Even when Trish and Derry discover the bodies beneath the church, the film holds back the full explanation. What is hunting them seems intelligent, calculated, and very much in control. Then the creeper finally gets a proper introduction. Instead of some unknowable predator, the audience gets a humanoid creature with leathery wings, a scarred face, pointed teeth, and a long coat. It's certainly recognizable, but the design feels much more conventional than the build-up suggests. The mystery disappears, and so does much of the tension created by the first half. What had felt like a disturbing roadside nightmare becomes a fairly standard monster chase. Jangly Man.
The Jangly Man is coming.
The human body is already unsettling when it moves the way it shouldn't, but that idea becomes especially disturbing in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Set in 1968, the film follows Stella Nichols and her friends after they enter the abandoned mansion and find a book belonging to Sarah Bellows, a girl whose stories have deadly consequences. The movie is at its best when it keeps its monsters just out of reach. Harold the Scarecrow appears in eerie glimpses before his attack, while the Pale Lady comes out of the darkness with a slow, almost dreamlike movement. The final monster is the Jangly Man, and after everything the movie has done with shadows, strange movement, and partial glimpses, his arrival should be the biggest scare of all. At first, it works. His body bends and comes apart in ways that barely look human, with contortionist Troy James performing many of the movements. But once the movie gives us a clear look at him, much of that unease starts to disappear. CGI covers a lot of the physical performance, making the Jangly Man look more like a digital creation than an actual monster standing in the room. The idea is terrifying, sure, but seeing every detail of it makes it strangely easier to process. The Mother.
But with a little practice, it can soon become a pleasurable experience.
Barbarian starts by making the house itself feel like the monster. Tess arrives at a rental in Detroit and quickly discovers that someone else is already staying there. That awkward setup gets worse when a hidden door leads to a basement corridor, then to a room that looks like something terrible happened inside of it. Every new discovery suggests the house is hiding something even worse, and the movie keeps stretching that uncertainty as far as it can. Eventually, Tess learns what's been living underground. The Mother is a huge, deformed woman who moves with frightening speed and treats her victims like helpless children. The reveal is shocking, but it also changes the movie completely. Once the threat has a face and a body, the endless basement loses some of its mystery and becomes a much more familiar creature feature setting. The Mother is still dangerous, yet the fear becomes easier to define. Before she appears, every doorway and tunnel could lead to something worse. Afterward, the horror finally has a shape, and that makes it much easier to contain. Pennywise Unmasked. clown can be frightening without ever needing to become anything else. In the 1990 It miniseries, Tim Curry turns Pennywise into exactly that kind of nightmare. The story follows a group of children who discover that a supernatural creature has been terrorizing the town for generations. Pennywise is only one form of the entity, but he quickly becomes the face everyone remembers. For most of the miniseries, Curry keeps Pennywise unpredictable. One moment he's smiling and joking with the children, and the next he's snarling through rows of sharp teeth. Then the story finally gets to the adult character's confrontation with Pennywise, and the creature's familiar clown form is replaced by a gigantic spider-like monster. The production used a large physical creature effect with stop motion for some of its movement. The problem is that the monster looks far less convincing than Curry ever did. Its movements are stiff, the stop motion is visibly dated, and the strange spider body removes the personality that made Pennywise so unnerving in the first place. After hours of watching Curry make a simple clown terrifying, the giant creature feels like a completely different kind of threat. Instead of becoming more frightening when Pennywise's true nature is exposed, the finale makes him easier to laugh at. Behind the Wall.
Mom?
Cobweb turns one of the safest places in a child's world into something impossible to trust: his own bedroom. 8-year-old Peter begins hearing tapping from inside the wall, followed by the voice of a girl who claims his parents have trapped her there. The more she talks, the worse the house feels. Peter starts questioning every locked door, every warning from his parents, and eventually even whether they're in real danger. The answer arrives when Peter opens the hidden passage and finally meets Sarah, the sister he never knew existed. Until then, she's been little more than a voice with an unknown face. What crawls out is a long-haired, deformed creature able to scale walls and move with sudden animal-like speed. It's an aggressive reveal, but it changes the fear completely. Sarah had been frightening because Peter and the audience could only imagine what was speaking to him. Once she's racing around the house as a visible monster, the movie becomes far more physical and familiar. The voice behind the wall could have belonged to anything. Giving it a face also gave the nightmare limits. Boogeyman.
I'm listening. Sweetheart, let me handle it.
The Boogeyman works best when it taps into a fear almost everyone understands from childhood: the idea that something might be waiting in the room after the lights go out. Sawyer Harper becomes convinced that a creature is hiding inside her house, and the movie turns her bedroom into the perfect place for that fear to grow. She relies on the glowing moonlight for comfort, rolling it across the floor and walls whenever she senses something nearby. Each time the light leaves part of the room in darkness, the audience is forced to wonder what could be standing there. The simple setup gives the creature enormous power without needing to define it. The problem comes later when the Boogeyman finally steps out of the dark corners and becomes a fully visible predator. Its long limbs, skeletal frame, and enormous mouth certainly look threatening, but now the audience knows exactly what Sawyer's been afraid of. It has a body, a size, and recognizable movements. The childhood nightmare suddenly follows the rules of an ordinary creature feature. A dark bedroom once felt dangerous because anything could be hiding inside it. After the reveal, there's only one monster left to worry about: those we fear. Fear works differently when nobody can prove that the thing in the woods is real. In The Village, the residents of an isolated community live by a strict set of rules because they believe dangerous creatures occupy the forest surrounding them. For most of the film, there's never enough evidence to know exactly what's out there. Even the adults seem genuinely terrified, which makes the threat feel bigger than anything the audience actually sees. Then the truth finally comes out through a dual twist. There are no supernatural creatures living in the forest. The elders have been creating the illusion themselves, dressing in monster costumes, and using the stories to keep the younger generation safely inside the boundary. More shockingly, the village is not historical at all. The story actually takes place in the modern day. The elders are a grief support group from the late 20th century who cordoned off a secluded Pennsylvania wildlife preserve to make a fake utopian society, escaping from the violence of the modern world. In other words, the film pulls the supernatural threat away and replaces it with a much more ordinary explanation. For the viewers who had spent the movie waiting for the creatures to finally show, the reveal couldn't be less satisfying. Once the costumes came off, there was nothing left to fear except the people who had been wearing them. Mama.
Where's Mama, Victoria?
The most unsettling thing about Mama is how naturally she seems to belong in places where nobody else should be. When Victoria and Lily are found after years in a cabin, they're brought to live with their Uncle Lucas and his girlfriend Annabelle. The girls adjust badly, whisper to someone who's not there, and behave as if a third presence has followed them home. At first, the film lets that presence exist mostly through movement. Something darts across a doorway, bends around the corners, or appears just long enough to make you question what you saw. That restraint gives Mama a presence before the movie ever shows her properly. Javier Botet's movements help sell the illusion when she is half hidden or seen from an awkward angle. Once Mama appears in full, though, the effect changes. Her stretched face, floating hair, and elongated limbs are imaginative, but the digital work comes easier to notice when the camera lingers. The more clearly the film presents her, the less threatening she feels. What had seemed like an impossible presence moving through the house gradually turns into a visible creature the audience can study, and that makes her much harder to fear. The smiling entity. The scariest face and smile is usually the one that looks completely human. Psychiatrist Rose Cotter learns that quickly after witnessing a patient taking her own life while wearing an unnaturally calm grin. Soon, the same smile begins appearing on people around her, sometimes on strangers, and sometimes on people she trusts. That's where the movie gets most of its power. Nothing needs to chase Rose through a hallway. Someone simply standing still and smiling at the wrong moment is enough to make the scene uncomfortable. By the finale, the entity behind the curse finally stops borrowing familiar faces. Rose confronts it in her childhood home, where it takes on a towering, distorted humanoid form before peeling away its own face to reveal an even more grotesque creature underneath. The design is elaborate and memorable, but it also changes that kind of fear the movie's been building. A smiling person could appear anywhere and still look almost normal. Once the evil becomes a giant physical monster, that uncomfortable familiarity is gone. The curse was harder to face when it could still look like anyone.